Today, what we're getting at, it's been a topic, I think, a perennial topic in the last few years at Aspen, which is, when you look at the new architecture of social media, the aggregation of people's views, the activation of passion, the way people are moving forward, both domestically in the United States and abroad. A lot of people once viewed that as a great liberalizing opportunity to spread essentially an ethic of mutual concern. What we've seen happen is something very disconcerting, where hate, enmity, division have become just as much part of the currency of that new world. And I guess I want to start with you, Wajahat.
Yeah.
Kind of, how do you, you've written so passionately on this, both about the politics we've seen, but I'd love to sort of look at how you look at the world of extremism that has evolved in this new social media space.
Yeah, well, speaking about extremists, first of all, hello everyone. I am your friendly neighborhood moderate Muslim on this panel. There are two Muslims. Thank you. There are.
He's so huggable.
There are two moderate Muslims here. Yeah. Only one of us is really moderate. By the end of the panel, you'll get to decide. But I'll give you a hint. He was born in Afghanistan. So leaving it there. But it's an interesting. Look, this is the interesting dilemma, right? Because social media is a tool.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, I want people to think about this. Like, oh, social media is attacking us. It's a tool. And a tool is as useful, as beneficial, as detrimental as the person or individual that uses that tool. So most people use Facebook to stalk really attractive people that they want to talk to, and they poke them. And that's how I got married, through poking through attrition. My wife finally gave up and said, fine, I'll marry you. Some of you guys use it to post photos of dogs and cats, videos of dogs and cats. Well, the moderate Muslim calls it, courtship. My wife calls it harassment, yes. But also what we've seen is, increasingly, the irony is, social media and technology and Twitter and Snapchat and Facebook is supposed to open up society and liberalize us and get us outside of our bubbles and our cultural cocoons. And I get to tweet with someone in Tunisia, and I could Skype with an Afghan refugee, and I can learn about why gun control is so poisonous to Rust Belt voters. But instead, what we saw with the election is social media, much like how we have these conversations and cocoons and bubbles in the real world, has further isolated us, number one. Number two, for some communities. Number two, what we've seen with ISIS, I gotta talk about ISIS as a Muslim. Yes, I know, going there. Look, this is the thing. New generations speak new languages, right? This is important. People just don't talk. People aren't just bilingual. It doesn't mean just Spanish and Urdu and English. To be multilingual means to tweet, to Facebook chat, to upload, to download, to Evite, to Tinder, to swipe right or swipe left if you're unlucky, to download, to upload, to Snapchat filter, and everything repeats. This is the language of new generations and new communities. And it is a filtered language, in a strange way, of how we view our reality and how we want to see our reality and communities represented globally, right? So I'll give you one quick example. You look at the hate, you look at the extremism, you think, oh my God, everyone's a hater and extremist on Twitter and Facebook. But that's not the case, right? When it comes to hate and extremism of both ISIS and the Islamophobes, and we've done the research, it is very few people who are deeply connected, who are deeply organized, who are very, if you will, ideologically driven to promote a toxic agenda. The difference is between them and the flabby moderate majority, I call this the flabby moderate majority, right, is you can have 6 highly invested, connected, coordinated people who will be far more useful than 600 flabby moderate majority, like community people, right? Both the Islamophobes and ISIS, extremism begets extremism, it's two sides of the same coin.
Right.
What they have done is they've taken a polarizing narrative, us versus them, and very specifically, and the research shows this, have used social media to promote toxic narratives. Very quick example. Raise your hand if you heard the following. President Obama is a Muslim. He is. No, I'm just kidding. Sharia is a threat to America. Traditional Islam is radical Islam.
I've heard it, but...
American Muslim organizations are fronts for the Radical Muslim Brotherhood. All of these talking...
He used to run one of them.
He used to run. This was this guy. But I'll end with this. All these talking points were considered fringe in 2010.
Right.
Thanks to the political climate And specifically, thanks to community organizations, very few people, and specifically thanks to the tool. I'm not blaming Facebook.
No, it's not just social media.
Short form.
Yeah.
Short form tool, not just social
form,
media. They were able to promote these narratives.
Right.
And what we've seen, and the fix to this, and I'll end on this, is in the marketplace of free ideas, the story that sticks, the story that is crafted well, the story that is tweeted well, finds its audience. Right. And so what you have to do to counter this is you have to empower authentic messengers. You have to help elevate their authentic narratives, and you have to train them in these social media tools to use it effectively to promote these narratives well.
Thank you.
And that's how we get there. I'm sorry for
No, thank
talking.
you. It's
got,
a great
got me
filibuster.
Sorry, I'm done.
But you know, it's important, and I'm very happy you put this perspective out there. I just want to ask historically for a minute, you know, as I've looked back and sort of look at the phenomena that you just described, I could take a pretty good clip of what you just said and look back at 1780s America and the era of scandal mongers. I could go back to the time of Andrew Jackson, or the time when the Atlantic was founded in 1857 by abolitionists, and abolitionists were at war with others that were pro-slavery at the time, and you came in and you sort of look at Andrew, you know, in the old days Andrew Jackson had his paper, you know, later Abraham Lincoln had the paper that everybody looked at him as sort of co-editing and owning. And so there was a time where we can look back and say, wow, we can see virtuous players in there that we sort of liked. There was also some dirty players that were sort of trying to protect and preserve norms in America that were on there. And so the media and the use of media platforms. Bill Safire wrote a great book about the early founding fathers called Scandal Mongers that was out, you know, about you know, fake news at that time and fake scandals that were ascribed. So what I want to know before I leave you, Wajahat, we made a transition out of that, I think, to a more responsible kind of journalism that's always been under sort of pressure. But do you see the possibility, given all that you've thought about in this and your own work in the New York Times and others, and as an opportunity to eventually see this as a phase that we begin moving out of this kind of modern scandal mongering, modern hate-filled tweeting, and go into something that's more healthy?
Do you want me to give you the politically correct, safe answer,
No.
or the straight
The real answer.
Real answer is the following: is everyone is desperately searching for a fix. No one has the fix right now. I say this as a person who's worked with Facebook and Google and social media and journalism. Right now, it's the wild, wild west on the social media, on the internet, on traditional media. What was considered truth is now alternative facts, is now fake news, is now state propaganda. I can say that, they can't. And so the long-term fix to this is the following, and I'm not going to filibuster on this, but this is the long-term fix, and I say this with utmost sincerity. It is a societal cultural fix. It is teaching digital literacy to our children right next to mathematics and English from a young age. Because, raise your hands, how many of you have seriously considered the impact of your digital footprint? And look at that, that was a minority. And the last thing I'll say is think about your children. Who here has kids?
Everybody has kids.
All right, everyone has kids.
Everybody has kids. They all have kids.
When our kids grow up and they run for office, their tweets, their Snapchats, and their Facebook posts, and their porn search history will be used against them. And so the long-term fix is digital literacy. The short-term fix is we're in the thick of it.
Right.
But the good news is this. This is the last thing I'll say. The good news is this. We are literally looking for disruption. Everyone is throwing innovative ideas at the wall, and we're all trying to see what sticks.
Right. Before I go to Parisa, Jose, I want you to tell us how you're going to fix all of this. Harris, when you're out there now tasked with this job of figuring out how you combat or help the U.S. government and help other entities understand how to deal with the phenomenon of violent extremism expressed online and all that matters. I've been intrigued with this question because I saw the Pentagon, and this is my own view, and it's my own editorial view. I saw the Pentagon do an extraordinary job of creating false depictions of what was going on in Afghanistan. That you could look at the op-ed pages of the New York Times, the Post, you could look at the coverage, and on the whole you began to see a battle over what was really happening in Afghanistan that had more to do with the perspectives that were shaped there than actually what was on the ground in Afghanistan. And so it showed me that the Pentagon had certain capabilities and facility in this area, but it seems when it comes to dealing with ISIS on the social media front, it's been pretty pathetic and impotent. That's my view. So what do you see as, what are the features of countering that, and what do you, I mean, I wouldn't want to put you in a position of grading your own employer, but how would you grade your own employer in this?
I'll get back to the grading.
Yeah, okay.
Let me start with something else.
Yeah.
As Wajahat said, social media did not create hate and extremism. We've had hate, we've had extremism throughout our history, and we have a long history in the US of groups who have promoted hate, who have promoted extremism, who have been actors and players who have not helped social cohesion and society function and move forward and progress in a manner that we all want it to see. So we've got history of white supremacism. We've got the KKK. We've got we had left and liberal anarchists and terrorists. We had animal rights activists who would blow things up.
Right.
We have anti-abortion activists. So hate in our culture and context is not new. And violence based on that ideological hate is not new for us either. What unfortunately has happened is that social media has amplified it in a way where it becomes overwhelming for that moderate, flabby majority that Wajahat was talking about.
That's you guys.
That's right. So when the KKK used to recruit someone, they didn't have a million people platform and audience. They essentially had meetings in local communities, in local, sometimes churches and local community centers where they went in and did one-on-one recruitment. Now the difficulty, and we see this with all forms of extremism, ISIS, Al-Qaeda, even white supremacist groups. We saw Dylan Roof go in Charleston, South Carolina, and shoot up an African American church. All form of violent extremists, they have a platform where it's not one person anymore that they're trying to convince. They put out a video, over millions and millions of people can see that video. And now and we can't control that. What happens is that when those videos get out, when those videos get made public, we get overwhelmed. There's a sense of overwhelmingness that happens to the majority of us, and we say, oh wow, this problem is bigger than it actually is. Because what Wajahat said, it could be maybe 12, 15, 30,
Minority.
100, a small minority of online hacktivists who sit in a cave somewhere, who've got digital Wi-Fi and are able to send these messages out. Yet we get overwhelmed. And that is actually, the studies show, that is exactly what ISIS and all the other violent extremist groups are hell-bent on trying to do.
So how do you respond?
So how do we respond? We respond, and what I'll do is, Wajahat at the end said something that was interesting, amplifying voices that are authentic to communities. There are good messengers and there are problematic messengers. We at the US government are not the best of messengers. You talked about our work in messaging in Afghanistan. That was a little bit different because you had a field. You had a battlefield. There was folks on the ground that were able to control what was going on and what messages were being sent out.
Right.
With ISIS and with groups and violent extremist groups, we can't control that message. They don't have a specific battleground, and they're losing territory by the day. They actually don't have a state anymore. Their state is the online platform. And so it is impossible to control the messages that come out of them. If you close down an account, another one gets open right away. And you can talk about this, Parisa. So what we need to do is amplify authentic voices. We need to amplify the voices. So we need to convene, bring together, of course, some of the folks in this group, fund, and make sure that the people who are truly representative of the community, people like Wajahat, people like Abdullah Antepli in the back, people who actually represent communities and who are able to put together programs to push back against that narrative.
So can I ask you a question
Yes.
real quickly about this? Your passion and the sensible recommendations you're making sound as if you're just, this is what we need to do now. 9/11 happened 16 years ago. So what has been going on for 16 years in dealing with, I was friends and colleagues with Peter Bergen, who interviewed Osama bin Laden well before 9/11 occurred, and you saw a sort of brew building in some parts of the Middle East. That brew is in other parts of the world as well, trying to create tensions and challenges with superpowers to look legitimate in the eyes of some audience that's been grieving. So they're going to kill people to do that. But that's been out there. Why do we suck at over 16 years developing messages that would have been? Because I agree with you,
right.
but I just can't. I mean, I hear it every year. We need to do this, and it just doesn't seem to happen.
Well, the problem is the threat changes so fast that we as bureaucratic entities cannot keep up with that threat. So when Osama bin Laden was recruiting folks, he didn't have the internet. He didn't have a website.
Right.
He didn't have Twitter. He didn't have Facebook. He didn't have WhatsApp. He had a video camera that he sat in front of.
Single
He had
shot.
a single shot. It's AK-47 next to him, and he would send it out via courier, a mail courier, to the Al Jazeera offices in Peshawar, Pakistan, and then they would broadcast it through Doha, and the world would see one specific message that was probably outdated. It was 2 months old because it took that long to get from one place to another. That is no longer the case. 15 years ago, that was the case. 2017, Twitter, WhatsApp, Snapchat, you can start sending out information real time. And so keeping up with that is really difficult because that's why I say that as a government, as institutions like Facebook, you can convene, you can empower, but you can't do the work because it's just too time intensive. You need people on the ground who spend their days working on this issue and who actually create counter narratives because people have to be passionate about it.
Right.
And this is the problem. Moderates are generally not as passionate as extremists, right? We need moderates who are just as passionate as violent extremists.
Parisa, is Facebook the new censor?
Oh, wow. That's a, look, I want to respond to all of what we've just discussed. And I think
But part of it is a question of whether you're going to modify or censor some of what comes up, right?
Yeah, and we do take down a lot of the content that we're discussing here because for us, the safety of our community is really important and we understand the role that we play. And to follow up on what everyone's saying, it is a multi-stakeholder
Can everybody hear, by the way?
to this
No,
issue.
yeah, I think that's a little,
Yeah.
Can we push that up just a little bit?
Whenever
I could tell
Parisa
it
wants
here.
to avoid the
Yeah.
problematic
I'm
questions,
like,
she
oh,
just
it's going.
hashes.
Yeah,
Drop
that-
the mic. Yeah.
So I would, because I know the back is on. So yeah, please go
Okay,
ahead.
so can
So you
people
take
hear
some
me?
content down.
Yes. Can people hear me now? Is that better?
Yeah, a
Okay,
little bit
great.
better. Great.
So we do. So it's really again, it's a multi-stakeholder approach, and I think that's what we're all
Right.
here to discuss. But in terms of Facebook, for us, as everyone said, the vast majority of people that come to social media do it for positive purposes, and it is about connecting to communities, building communities, sharing what's important to them as well. But then you'll find a very small, minority that uses it for these hateful purposes. And for us, we know people are not going to come and share and connect if they don't feel safe. So the safety of our community is a top priority. And so we put out high importance on that. We deeply invest on these issues. And the key way we do that, the first way is through our policies. And so talking about our content policies, we have our external, what we call our community standards, which lists out what we allow on Facebook and what we don't. And we don't allow hate speech, and we don't allow violent organizations, which are terrorist organizations or violent extremists, to have a presence on Facebook. So that's the key piece. That's our policies. And we actually just published 2 pieces in this series that we're calling Hard Questions, where we talk about how we counter terrorism and hate speech as well. I recommend folks read it because it really talks to these issues in a really extensive way. And you can find that at newsroom.fb.com. But so it's our policies, it's how we enforce those policies. And that's really done through teams that we have, human expertise. We have teams across the world who have backgrounds in issues of violent extremism, in hate speech, a variety of professional backgrounds and language expertise, so that when we become aware of this content, we review it and take it down as well. And we also use...
So when just pause you there for a minute. I don't mean to interrupt, but how geopolitically savvy do people need to be who are engaged in that? Because there are places like in Egypt right now, which is being run by a General Sisi, in a pretty autocratic way that's awful for journalists, where someone's terrorist in that country is somebody else's person fighting for freedom. Or you can look at, in the United States, there are some who thought Black Lives Matter, and some of the posting of some of the killings of black men in what turned out to be racially charged police were the kinds of things that people said. Some people said this is absolutely the kind of currency that we need to have platforms for. Others said this is basically seeding racial tensions. So how do you sort through that? That seems to me to be a very hard line.
Yeah, no, I think you raise a key challenge, and we're talking about 2 billion people using Facebook monthly, and it's across a diversity of cultures and countries and languages, and we do it through a variety of ways. This human expertise that I'm talking about, there are people that have those kinds of backgrounds, and we talk a lot. We work on partnerships, and we talk a lot to experts across the field, so on these different topics, and we take a very thoughtful approach to all the topics that you've identified as well. So really talking to whether it's governments across the world, it's experts, academic experts, NGOs, civil society as well, so we can best understand this issue and make the right determinations on those topics. But the human expertise we have, it is like language expertise and background on these issues as well. So we have that. We have the human expertise part. We do use technology and are using that more, and that includes artificial intelligence in terms of identifying that content, and then the partnerships piece as well. And within that partnerships piece is what we call our counter speech programs. And that is really because we believe, there is obviously, we'll take down the hate speech and the terrorist content, but there is also a key role to be played for pushing back against those narratives as well, of raising up the moderate voices, of educating people too, and that's what we consider counter speech. And so our role at Facebook is how do we empower those credible speakers, the local voices, to make sure that positive messaging, that counter messaging is amplified. And so we've invested heavily across the world, because when you talk about it, on the counter speech side, it is really country by country. Counter speech looks different. We have to make sure we're empowering the local voices there, the credible speakers. So our programmatic approach is also diverse in terms of.
Do you see that as what she's doing is effective?
Well, actually, before I was working with New York Times as a contributing op-ed editor, which sounds much more fancy. I actually just left my job where I was creative director of Finis Labs for the past year and a half. I actually was working with Facebook and Google on this issue. And let me respond to all this and drop some ideas at Aspen Ideas Festival. I'll speak as a community member, as a Muslim whose moderation is always indicted and questioned daily, and who's asked, what am I doing to fight ISIS, even though I've never met an ISIS member. And I'm asked to apologize for criminal actions of a minority community I've never met.
I see an ISIS restaurant.
There is an ISIS restaurant
in
Aspen.
It's a movie theater. It's an unfortunately named.
It's old Al Qaeda videos.
I totally got freaked
on
out by
matinee.
it.
Someone was in Aspen and decided to name their whole movement after their violent movement about
I did
the
not
Great
want to go
Aspen
close
Theater.
to that place. Because a picture of me under an ISIS sign.
I'm going to actually take a selfie and post it. But in all seriousness, this is the problem. I'm speaking both as a person who's worked with Facebook and has some solutions, which we'll share, and as a community member. Because we get asked all the time, what are you doing to fight ISIS? And I'm like, my mom is in California wearing a sari, making biryani, watching the Warriors. She does not care about ISIS. I've never met anyone who's a member of ISIS. We just went and did Eid in the Makespace community in Virginia, and afterwards we had very exotic foreign meal of crab cakes at brunch, where my son drank iced tea, not extremist iced tea, just Lipton iced tea. And the reason why I couch it in this is when it's a top-down governmental approach in the past 16 years, and you mentioned this, why it fails, is because the government strategies are so lame, so inauthentic, so top-down driven, completely disconnected from the communities, that Muslims look at it, they just laugh. And then when it's a top-down corporate approach, or I would even say a top-down Aspen approach, as you'll see, there is a lack of representation at Aspen. Well-intentioned, but people live in their own bubbles and they don't meet community members or people from different communities. So they just don't know. And so the key here is a nexus, is a mix. And this is the big idea I'm going to drop. You don't have to counter violent extremism. You have to give alternatives to violent extremism. So we went to Indonesia with Facebook. We went to Bangladesh. We went to the Philippines, and we went to my hometown of the Bay Area, right? This is how you should do it, in my opinion. Go to the ground. Don't parachute in. Go in authentically, talk to grassroots leaders, a multicultural coalition of the willing. We convened, tech sector nerds. We convened activists, students, young people, people in politics, and journalists. We got them together for 3 or 4 days. We did a hackathon, which is a 3-day sprint session where you come up with solutions to challenges. We had them address their most pressing local challenge. And we had them come up with the best solutions. We mix them up in different teams. We put a tech geek with the journalist, with a student in one team. 20 people, highly curated. We spent time on it. They had 3 days. And literally from scratch, at the end of the 3rd day, they came up with a prototype idea from scratch, which then they, Shark Tank style, pitched to their local community, community leaders, and an online audience that then voted for the best idea. Facebook convened it. Facebook said, listen, we're not going to choose the best idea. You will choose the best idea. We'll fund it. The government kind of supports on the back end, because if the government comes in, because of the government's interesting, challenging history with many of these communities, it taints the project. The ideas that they came up with, check this out. I just want to give these ideas.
A little shorter format.
Yeah, shorter format. Philippines. We have a problem with fake news. I know Parisa doesn't like that. So a journalist, a tech geek, came up with a Facebook app in 3 days that lets you audit your post to see whether or not it could be offensive. That came up in 3 days. Bangladesh. We love American pop culture. We're young graphic artists and students. The winning idea was a digital comic book series, because why should Iron Man and Captain America save us? We need Bangladeshi superheroes saving Bangladeshi communities. The second place winner was It's Okay, an app to talk about mental health, because no one talks about depression and anxiety. Final thing I'll say is this: in Tunisia, they say, listen, don't ask us how to fight ISIS. You really want to help us? Help give us entrepreneurial ideas. Help us jumpstart our friggin' businesses. Because what we've seen is Tunisia has the largest amount of foreign fighters that join ISIS from the most economically disadvantaged communities. If you give them spaces of entrepreneurship, innovation, and leadership, they are attracted to winning, not losing. Sorry for my filibuster.
Yeah,
that's my big idea.
You're so good at it, but that's okay. It's good. It's very interesting. Go ahead, Harris.
Yeah, so piggybacking off what Wajahat said, he talked about the international field. Now, it's really important that we get it right domestically. It's really, really important, because the last thing that we want to do is marginalize the very communities we want to engage, right? You have, because if we focus all of our efforts when it comes to violent extremism on, and I'm going to be frank, on the American Muslim community, we will be ineffective, right? Because the American Muslim
that's why you guys have been ineffective for 16 years,
well,
mostly.
I wouldn't say that the government really hasn't had a violent extremism plan for the past 16 years. So it's something much newer. The government is just starting to invest resources in this space. Previously, we really had not. The focus was counterterrorism. It was kind of law enforcement and intelligence based. This is a new space for the government that we're getting into.
Well, now you've got a travel ban, and
so let me continue, Steve.
Yeah.
So the reason it's important for us to get it right domestically is because we risk marginalizing the very communities that we most need on our sides, right? Like I said, we have had a history of hate and violent extremism in this country. The KK has been around. Animal rights activists who've used violence have been around. We've had folks who've done this type. I mean, Timothy McVeigh, the biggest domestic act of terrorism. What we need to focus on is empowering, engaging, and doing it correctly. We need to ensure that our focus is not one community, not one religion, not one ethnic community.
Right.
American Muslim communities, and the research has been shown, done by Gallup, done by Pew, by everyone, are one of the most, with American Jews, most integrated communities in this country.
So
by the press coverage, you would not think that, right?
Right.
Because the press coverage is focused on the issue of violent extremism, and it is not focused on how we can counter that in a specific way where we amplify those positive
You're both
voices.
saying something so important, which I agree with, which is you go to the base, you figure out how people can become stakeholders of their own destiny, have a lot more empowerment. I actually completely agree with you.
There's a but coming.
There's a but, and
It's
I want to,
coming my way.
and it's going to go to Parisa's. I think that sounds really good for people who are in the mode to have uncomfortable conversations about mental health. Develop and put themselves in a position where social fabric and networks. But I also think that's a kind of, and I hate to put you in because I know you're going to hate this. It's sort of an Aspen-y kind of everybody will feel good later and be good and be responsible. There's an element out there that's just very tough to reach, and I think within the United States there's been failure at community building. I think I think globally there are a lot of people that feel demeaned and left behind and are angry about it and want to take other kinds of actions. And I'm interested in whether or not, I look at Facebook as the massive data, what Wajahat said is, you're so, because you can look at the patterns of interaction, the patterns of, nefarious players going out to hijack lost souls or souls that want to be filled tomorrow. What have you learned inside Oz about how people are doing this? And is there anything in the DNA of recruitment, the use of these social media platforms, that would help you neutralize that more directly?
Well, I can talk to a couple of things. It's not really about what we see, but it's also about a lot of the academic research that's been done. And you take radicalization.
But you do see everything, right? You see.
Well, we look at it in terms of what we can do in terms of the role that we can play in terms of content. So it's speaking to that. So radicalization, and you look at a lot of the academic research, it is mostly an offline piece. There is a role that the internet plays, and we address that, but it's mostly happening offline. And so in terms of patterns that we might see, when I talked about the content that we take down, particularly around terrorist content, it does happen in networks. So when we identify content, we will fan out from that content to identify other content and see what else might be taken down. But sort of talking again, just about what we see and what we hear from experts, the positive narratives, the alternative narratives are really key as well. And so that's why we've invested in both what Waj was talking about, the hackathon piece.
Right.
And what's great about that is that we're not only bringing communities together to come up with the right local solution that addresses the local issue, because that's important too, but it's the convening that takes place. These are groups all around the world who are looking to do something.
Can you scale
that
that?
want to be, so that's one part, and we're doing more of these hackathons.
Do they cost a lot of money?
No, they're not. They're not inexpensive,
It's
but they're worth it.
The whole
No, I'm just asking. What
no.
you need is a cheap, scalable, replicable thing that can, if it's
But
expensive, then it won't work. right?
And the thing is, it's not wishy-washy. Literally, the convening is how can you create an innovative digital solution to combat hate and extremism? And people choose to opt in. These are people who are professionals, who don't get paid, who take 3 days out of their life. And you said something very important. The key ingredient is passion. You need passionate people who come up with the best solutions.
But so there's that. There's also the other piece. When I say we're empowering the credible speakers, we do trainings across the world for NGOs and community leaders on how to best create effective counter speech and how to use the platform effectively to get that messaging out. We have another program that we've run and DHS has been involved in called Peer-to-Peer, and that is a global university program where student teams create campaigns to push back against hate and extremism. It's taken place in hundreds of universities around the world. It's reached 56 million people offline and online, and more than 5,500 students have participated in it. And it's happened in the US, but it's happened around the world. And what's really important about that too, again, is these are the credible voices. They're young people, and sometimes they're the ones that are targeted by the hate and the extremism as well. It's localized. They respond to whatever is happening in their community as well. It's scalable because you go to all the universities. These are our future leaders, so they're thinking about these issues as well. And we've seen great success with that program.
Is Mark Zuckerberg running for president?
This one I'm going to pass along.
So, let me ask one other question about Mark Zuckerberg. Mark Zuckerberg changed the mission of Facebook. When he was a young guy, early on, he said, our job at Facebook is not to build community, it's to show the world as it really is. Recently, he's changed the mission of Facebook to be about building community. Is that may sound innocuous, but is that a big deal inside Facebook land for your people and the way you see your mission?
I mean, what I love, and I've been at Facebook now for 5.5 years.
So you're rich.
Parisa's very
I came after that piece of it, but
when you get the bottom line.
Yeah, that's really cut to the core of the question.
Steve's trying to angle for a job.
Yeah, I know. But 5.5 years is considered old timer. But it's an incredibly thoughtful place. We're
Right.
really thoughtful people, and that starts at the top, thinking about
But has
our role.
this switch meant something to you guys internally?
It-
That
it-
you
you know,
weren't
it's
about
hard to
building
follow.
community before,
No,
and
it's
now
always
you are?
It's always been a piece of it, particularly in the counter speech side. But then we think about, you know, what more we could be doing around our products or our programs and our efforts as well, and seeing how people are using Facebook. And so that's going to change over time.
But can
as well.
I give an example
Yeah.
how what Facebook did right?
Sure.
And
Short
as an example,
form.
it goes right to what
Please
you said.
do.
No, short
Yes.
form. Why Messenger is so important. You guys came up with an idea. It was like I think a student idea to combat recruitment of radical right white supremacists. So it's very slick videos. It's Facebook videos, very well made, and it's a tatted up guy who looks just like that type of a stereotypical right-wing terrorist, right? And he's tatted up, skinheads, and it's 30 seconds into the video, you're like, oh my God, this is like a recruitment video. And then it pivots. It pivots 30 seconds in and it goes, that was my life when I used to hate. And the reason why that's so effective is that there are people online who are searching for content. They go to them and like, you know, they're on the fence. And then they get an authentic messenger to them, but then the narrative shifts. You use technology, a narrative, slickness, and a messenger, and it gets those vulnerable societies. Two major problems in this are sustainability and government metrics of success. Because the big picture idea, in my opinion, is still, look, most violent extremists, what's the DNA of most of them? Anger and dislocation.
Right.
They feel angry and they feel dislocated from society, so they join a group that empowers them. If they had more alternatives that were healthier, entrepreneurs, they felt better, yada, 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 it would decrease it. The government, unfortunately, only measures success in this field by the following. Your hackathon, how many people stopped joining ISIS because of it? How many people did you de-radicalize from joining ISIS? And what we want to get them to rethink in a way is think of alternative spaces of empowerment, because you can empower communities that can deter
allies.
future people. The last second thing I was saying, no filibuster, sustainability. Most of these, you touched it. How do we make it scalable?
Yeah.
And Parisa will say this. These things can, we've done 5 of them. We can see how they can just energize an entire community.
Right.
You need money, tech sector, private sector, narratives, journalism space, and the government funding initiatives like this.
Harris?
I do want to say a couple things. Number one, why this room is important, and addressing this issue to this room. You talked about the government and metrics. That is why it's important for foundations, funders, and folks who are not in the government space to address this issue, right?
Ballers.
We have ballers, right? If there's ballers in this room, they need to be able to think about how do we empower those voices? Because we can't look at government to do everything, right? Government, and when government comes up with a policy and tries to implement that policy, it will take a long time for that to actually impact. So if you can have agile, small programs that take off,
Government's agile and small, right?
right?
Yeah.
Agile, small programs,
Yeah.
it comes from the private sector. The second thing,
Can I
it's
just-
important.
Can I just start one
Sure,
thing? But I
please.
think in terms of the government, like the convening power that you
Yeah.
have is so key. And you know, I know a couple of years
Like
ago,
around Eid celebrations, for instance.
you had, you know, there was the, you know,
points.
the big conference around countering
Yeah.
violent extremism, and that got everybody together. And that's where
Right.
we met a lot of the people that we
Exactly.
are partnering with today.
And the second point
Yeah.
I want to make
Right.
is an issue of fear in this room. The goal of violent extremism is to impact social cohesion negatively. So what is essentially trying to do, what the goal of ISIL or ISIS is not to destroy any specific government. Well, they say that is,
Right.
but that is not that's not their psychology. Their psychology is you Christian, Muslim, Jew, Buddhist, atheist who live together and who are hanging out in the mountains of Aspen, you guys need to not, my goal is to make sure you don't trust each other.
This is the biggest threat of ISIS.
This is the biggest threat, is that
Right.
they want to make sure that when you look at me, a so-called moderate Muslim,
Right.
that you don't trust me and I don't trust you. And our biggest response in ensuring that we push back against that narrative is keeping that social cohesion and ensuring that we are able to trust each other. And that happens at the community level. That does not happen at the government level. That happens in settings like these.
Thank you. I want to go to the audience now, but as you've said this, is there's a lot we have touched. There's also a lot we haven't touched. We haven't gotten much into the Russia question and the use of social media and what their goals are. There's a fantastic article, and this is not a selfish, self-indulgent thing here, but it did appear in The Atlantic in November 2016, called War Goes Viral, How Social Media is Being Weaponized Across the World by Emerson Brooking and P.W. Singer. It's an extraordinary journey through this. If there was one article that you wanted to go through to look at the many, many dimensions of this challenge, this is a way to get at it. It's a long-form version of Wajahat and Parisa and Harris that takes this. But it also deals with the question of what people ascribe to Russian intentions of what they're doing, which is to create not a political candidate winning here or there, but fundamental distrust in institutions and distrust of each other.
Yep.
And I think it's a very similar pathway that what you just described with ISIS or other disruptors that are trying to use this technology. And I think it's a very important point. So let me open the conversation to all of you. Questions, and we have a mic going around the room, do we? Yes, there's our mic friend. Rich? Oh, I thought you winked at me. Okay, right here in the middle. There we go, yes. And tell us who you are.
Hi, I'm Ann.
Hi, Ann.
Live in San Francisco.
All right.
As I'm listening to you all, particularly the last dialogue about the intention of subversive groups
Right.
trying to change America by wanting us not to get along with the distribution of fake information, the fake information that we've been subjected to from the White House recently is also intent on tearing us apart because it maintains one set of people and continually giving them information titled fake news. It's become a brand. And so I ask sort of all of us, but you who are familiar and working so hard in this, how do we separate that particular problem?
So let's give that to Parisa. Parisa, how do you deal with White House fake news?
Well, I'm going to
Is that fair?
punt it to Waj. I think Waj said something really important about digital literacy and critical thinking as well, being a key piece of this. Like, there's always been misinformation, propaganda, things throughout history, and now it might be amplified more. But our key is, on the Facebook side, we'll always look at product ways and other efforts that we can be making to make sure that it doesn't get amplified in that way. And a lot of that is by pushing up these other narratives and these positive narratives. But it does also come down to critical thinking skills and digital literacy, and those are areas that we've looked at supporting as well, to making sure at all levels people understand how to process the information that is coming.
So ISIS's main goal is to eliminate the gray zone. They believe it's us versus them, and they believe, and they're not stupid, they know they can't take on America. They want a death by 1,000 cuts. Overextend us, overreaction, get us involved in wars we don't want, bleed us, both literally and with money, but also, quote, self-inflicted wounds. They want self-inflicted wounds. And they said that Donald Trump is the biggest self-inflicted wound of America, because they want to tear apart civic society and specifically have Americans go against each other when it comes to race and religion, because they believe the veneer of religious freedom and liberty is exactly that, veneer, that underneath it is the darkness of white supremacy, which will engulf America. If you look at the problem, it's a big problem. It's because you have a troll in the White House who uses his Twitter account as a commander-in-chief to promote much of the agenda of, I will say, the ideological equivalent of ISIS, not militarily or violent. It's Steve Bannon. Because Steve Bannon has specifically said the following: I'm weaponizing media. I'm deliberately using it as an instrument, and he sees as his influencers, he says Michael Moore and Leni Riefenstahl, right? And so very deliberately, he says the tip of the spear in what he says is a civilizational conflict is the media narrative, propaganda, state propaganda. And so we have two challenges. The one challenge is, how do we inoculate our future generation, even ourselves? Like when I ask you to raise your hand, when I ask you to raise your hand and say, have you thought about your digital footprint? No one did. And what are we teaching our kids about digital literacy and critical thinking? Number one, we need innovative tools, which people are coming out with, number two. And number three, as a society now, we have to push back against a White House, and I'll end on this, that is literally using all of its power and social media to promote fake news to create dissension, mistrust, and fear. And it's going to take a multicultural coalition.
I think it falls on me here for a moment. You can applaud if you like, but
Thank you.
I need to provide slightly a different view, because I have a great number of friends who are serving this administration and who see themselves as authentic parts of a movement to try to help the country move it in a certain way, who are not racist and bigots.
Yep.
And so I think that I just want to be clear that as we look at this question, regardless of what the president does, presidencies are also franchises of people. And while I agree with you on Bannon, I don't agree about John Kelly or H.R. McMaster or Dina Powell or Gary Cohn or some others that are actually working hard to try and kind of find an alternative there that both addresses what they see as real Americans' problems in moving them forward without falling into something that's so divisive, where people are put into these zero-sum games, and that is done. So I just want to make sure I put that
And
on
as
the
you
table
know,
as
many
well.
of the people in the Trump administration, we know this, we're in D.C., they believe that their patriotism is to stay in the White House, and he knows this, stay in DHS to moderate.
And to contain.
And to contain.
Yeah, and to contain. So many people. Danny Seabright.
Thanks for that point. I didn't mean to.
No worries.
So thank you. Two-part question, two small parts. First, many people say that it's the responsibility of the Muslim countries around the world to do more, to help their populations, to empower them, to provide alternatives. As you rightly say, I truly believe that that's the answer, providing alternatives. So how do you rate things like the Hidayah Center in Abu Dhabi and some of these other efforts? The Saudis are going to undertake a brand new effort as a result of President Trump coming and giving them the way forward to do this, showing them the way. How do you rate their efforts, and what more should they be doing? And then number two, is political Islam part of the answer or part of the threat?
Pieces questions. I like it. Those are tasty.
But we're gonna do lightning. We've only got 10 minutes or so, so we're gonna go lightning round, lightning answers, lightning questions. So go ahead. Raj, or Harris. Yeah.
So,
Can you talk about it?
I mean, I can talk about it. I think some of the programs have worked better than others. It's like any other government program. Some have worked well, some have not. But I think, to your question overall, I think the Muslim majority countries do see ISIS as a threat, and a lot of them are trying to push back. And a lot of them have tried to develop programs to push back.
But do you think ISIS is the equivalent of political Islam? That's
No.
what he's really
No.
asking.
No, not at all.
It's not fair.
That's what Danny is asking.
No,
Yeah.
not at all.
He just
Not
nodded
at all.
yes.
And another party in Tunisia, man.
No, but I think
And
I think
there's-
this is a key question,
there's this-
because
yeah.
when Jim Glassman was in the Bush administration as an undersecretary for political affairs, I guess public policy and diplomacy, he would have said that his role, which was very different than his predecessor Kieran Hughes, who was out trying to make the world like America, he says, screw that. I want young Muslim men who are in a youth bulge and have this to turn their aspirations and frustrations into political engagement and activity and away from violence. And I don't give a crap whether they like the United States. I thought it was one of the most enlightened positions that Jim ended up not being supported by many inside the Bush administration of that view. But if you are saying that to young men who are then engaged in some form of political Islam, which now some countries out there are trying to exterminate, what does that do? And is that doable?
There's no space for you. You have no autonomy. Religion can only play an active role in politics when it's Christian and in America and part of the religious right. But if you Muslims want to engage in the democratic process in your country and still have faith play a large part in it, even then we will see you as suspect. And so what you have to realize is political Islam in Egypt is not the same as political Islam in Tunisia, is not the same as political Islam in Palestine, right? If you look at Tunisia, for example, offshoot of the Muslim Brotherhood, the Ennahda party after the Arab Spring, we engage with the democratic process peacefully in a nonviolent fashion and have our religious values inform it. We got elected, and what did they do? A very amazing, pivotal decision they made. We lost, we stepped down, right? If you come in now and say, we're gonna crush that, you are now gonna radicalize an element of society that says, when we actually did what you, America, the beacon of freedom, told us to, engage the democratic process, even then you came and silenced us. And by the way, you just sold $100 billion worth of arms to Saudi Arabia, which you, Donald Trump, said is the greatest enabler of terrorism, which they're going to use in Yemen to cause a sectarian war. Okay, so what's my alternative? I'm screwed from every angle. F it, ISIS. And
let me just take Danny's question one strident step further and ask you, that if the Saudi-led Association of Countries came along and said to Facebook, we're going to ban you in all of our countries and remove Facebook as a privilege of citizens unless you ban the Muslim Brotherhood and its adherents, what would you do?
So these are tough questions that are probably above my pay grade. I mean, it's not an easy question, and there are other people that work on the sort of those kind of geopolitical issues too.
I
that
respect
would,
you sidestepping.
Yes.
I had to ask it.
No, but just to answer the first
Yeah.
part of his question, I will say that we've worked with Hadaya before,
Right.
and they have the convening power, and I know they are doing a lot in terms of training and empowering the local voices. From the university program I mentioned, P2P, we've worked with a lot of universities throughout the Middle East, and most of the campaigns have focused on violent extremism. How do we inoculate people, make it less attractive? Some incredible campaigns have come out, and these campaigns reach millions of people. And what's great about it is, again, it reacts to local issues, but it's online, and a huge part of it's offline. So a lot of these university students will go out and go to grade schools and talk to kids at early ages and do training programs, and it's scalable.
Thank
So,
you for that.
yeah.
Let me gather a bunch of questions at a time, and I'll keep track. But do we have a mic right here? We're just going to go real quick and go to as many of you as we can. Yes.
Can you comment on the travel ban?
Travel ban. Yeah. Well, I call it the travel pause, but we can get to the travel. Yeah, exactly. Right here, this lady right here.
Yeah, hi. A couple of really quick references to white supremacist terrorism here, and I just wanted to, if anybody on the panel could speak about what the prospects are of battling that now.
Okay, great. Yes, right here. Hi.
How do you use digital tools and platforms to improve monitoring and evaluation of CV efforts?
How do you use digital platforms?
Digital platforms to improve monitoring and evaluation.
Great. Great question. Who else? We have the back right here. Hi.
Wondering,
You guys are perfect. Thank you. You understand lightning round. Yes. Boom.
Germany, as an example, with its latest laws regarding hate speech and Facebook and fining them. Wondering
Can you
whether
guys
that's
speak a little louder? I mean, just
Yes.
yell into the mic.
Looking at Germany as an
There you go.
example of fining Facebook for hate speech and regulation regarding this. And
Okay.
whether
Finding
that's-
Facebook. Yes, right here. This gentleman.
I'm on the board of the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists, and we've recently raised cyber and hacking to an existential risk for humanity.
Huh.
And it's because of the interface between hacking and nuclear. And the reason I'm raising
Is that
this,
part of your clock?
Yeah, well, at the moment the clock is set on nuclear and climate change, and cyber is one that's emerging. And it's because we will get to the stage soon where we're able to completely fake a nuclear attack.
Read the article in the Atlantic that I
And
just
it is
mentioned because it
terrifying.
deals
So
with
the
some
question I've
elements
got
of that.
Is that something that is being recognized that essentially it's an existential
Thank
threat?
you. Any other quick question to throw in the mix? Okay, we're going to stop there then. So we've got travel ban, the question of white supremacists and dealing with this, digital platforms, Germany, hate speech, finding Facebook, sorry. And the question of what I find very interesting is cyber hacking and cyber behaviors, which if you go back, one of the wonderful things about this story is it goes back to 1914, it goes back to earlier, goes back to the Civil War, it goes back to the sense of what ISIS created with a sense of momentum around taking Mosul when it basically took northern Iraq with just a couple of thousand of men in this by creating falsehoods. And so it really does lay into a question of this. So I really love that question. And I love all the questions, but I particularly love your question. So Raj, short form.
Short form, travel ban, ineffective, counterproductive, unconstitutional, and mean-spirited. It's not going to work. ISIS laughs at us. They can easily sidestep it. Most radicals are homegrown European people with European passports who can literally be like, okay, I'm a dual national citizen. I'm not coming from these countries anyway. So great, you guys are stupid. I'm going to come in from Germany and kill you.
Before you go on to the next one, just remember that travel ban, regardless of how the Supreme Court has now authorized it, it was written as if it was a 90-day block on people from certain countries, 120 days on refugees.
In January.
So that the Department of Homeland Security could improve and enhance its screening and vetting procedures.
Extreme vetting.
I interviewed in public his secretary, his boss, Secretary John Kelly, and I asked him, I said, haven't you had more than enough time without the effect of this to go ahead and improve your vetting and scroll? Why would you need this? And without answering me directly, he says, we are, in fact, and we have, in fact, improved the screening and vetting procedures that we have going. He had a kind of weird misnomer where he says, we've been dependent upon the United Nations to vet too much, which I can't understand that answer, but he said it. But when you look at it, I think the really interesting question is that his department, Harris's department, says it has, in fact, done the things that needed to be done without the travel ban having to go into effect. Am I wrong?
No, well, the reason that is because it's been held up in the courts.
Right.
So the executive, when the executive order came in,
Not you're improving the procedures,
No,
only
no.
blocking people.
the executive order has been held up in the courts
Right.
until recently the Supreme Court allowed a limited form of implementation. But the executive order has been held up in the courts. But that has not stopped the department from doing its job, which is continue to vet and ensure that the system is updated and to ensure that we're
So
constantly.
the real story is the
keeping
travel
safe.
ban is superfluous if you've done your job, right?
If you've done your job, you are we've continued to keep the American people safe.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah, okay.
It's good for Steve Bannon's white nationalist base.
Okay. White supremacists,
Keep it real.
Parisa.
Yeah, so white supremacists is a part of the violent extremism that we're talking about as well, and there are white supremacist groups that are not allowed on Facebook, like the KKK. You're right, it is a huge issue, and again, our efforts address that as well, and having these localized efforts. A lot of the content,
How do you
particularly.
deal with someone like Richard Spencer? And he's on Twitter, he's off Twitter. He goes through some sort of process of, I guess, getting cleaned up and gets back on. Do you have Richard Spencer problems in Facebook?
So I can't speak specifically, but I can tell you sort of violent organizations, if they have a violent mission, if they've been involved in past acts of violence, are not allowed on Facebook. They can't have a presence. If you're a member of that organization, you can't have a presence. You can't even have a profile that, a page about your cat if you're a part of a violent organization. You can't promote that, you can't say something that promotes that organization. You can't say, I love ISIS. That piece of content will come down. But having these sort of localized efforts allows us to create the sort of, to counter those messages. And a lot of the, in terms of even the university program, a lot of those students focused on white supremacists, like violent extremists and white supremacists.
Real
Those are the kind
short
of
form,
content.
we've only got a few minutes.
Yeah.
Digital platforms.
Just to address
Yeah.
that specific issue first, our secretary, Secretary Kelly, has been on record in front of Congress and even in the media talking about the fact that we are addressing all forms of violent extremism and specifically right-wing white supremacists. So he's been on record as addressing that as well.
Okay, real quick, digital platforms, Swaj?
That's a Facebook question.
So, yeah, I'm sorry, the question again was digital platforms and how can we use it?
How do you track results?
Yeah, I mean, it's a variety of things. We look, it's, so in terms of like, you're talking about counter narratives and counter speech. So it will be the reach, it will be the kind of audience that you're reaching. So like I said, we can look at the university campaigns. I know they've reached 56 million people, or the hackathons as well. And when we really talk about these efforts, we say to people, the credible speaker is really important. And then the message has to fit the audience, and really think about the audience you want to reach. It doesn't have to be a huge audience, but it has to be the right audience as well. So there are ways that we're looking at it. Tools could be better, ways to track it could be better as well, but it's definitely things we think about and talk to a lot of
Let me ask you two
external
very
people.
short form. Do you think the German model of holding platforms responsible for what comes on and finding them is a healthy approach to
So
this?
what I'll say is our country is unique in our free speech laws. We're unique. I mean, we're unique. We're different from the European countries. And I think overall and in the long term, that serves us well.
Yeah.
We are a people who say what we want to say regardless of anyone. And you can see on this panel that is something that we cherish as Americans. So I don't think the answer is to limit free speech. And I think that's been our approach. That's been something that we've focused on. The answer is to amplify positive speech. Amplify, 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 don't limit, because that is a slippery slope, something that our founding fathers never wanted to get into.
Watch, quick thought on that?
Multicultural coalition of the willing. I know Facebook might not like it, but if Germany spots something and decides to speak out, at least it brings it attention. And if you can bring it attention, you realize it's a problem, and then you can now come up with a solution to that problem. And we can come up with our own organic American solution to that problem. Digital literacy, better tools, better monitoring, and making our country a little bit more resilient when it comes to deciphering between fake news and legitimate news. It's going to be, it's a work, look, to answer your question, work in progress, to be honest. Anyone that says this is the answer, they're bullshitting you. This is a work in progress. We're all figuring this out right now.
My answer is you got to be very careful with the lines of what you call hate speech or protest speech or
Very
activist
messy.
speech,
Exactly.
that it could become very, very dangerous. And then finally, this very interesting question on whether cyber hacking, what we've seen with Russia, where you can create, essentially a condition that leads you into some catastrophic decisions. But thoughts?
Yeah, thought is this. Look, James Brennan, didn't he say that John Brennan, the former CIA director, he said the biggest threat that he sees is the cyber threat. And we have to acknowledge it, we have to be prepared for it, we have to get resources, and we have to come up with solutions. And when it comes to Russia in particular, and this is what really frightens me, and also when it comes to white nationalism and tying them together, you need the government to acknowledge and admit that this is a problem. And when it comes to the rise of white nationalism, it is a huge problem. Southern Poverty Law Center says that the greatest exponential increase in the last 5 years in hate crimes is nativist groups, white supremacist groups, radical anti-government groups. And now what we're seeing with Russia, Russia has interfered in our election process. You just saw that malware that affected all of us. And our president says probably. So you need the government right now, especially from top down, to literally acknowledge this as a problem, come up with solutions, talk about it. But if we're not even willing to do that when it comes to Russia and white supremacy, are we really making us safe?
Harris, quick thought?
I can speak on, I'm not going to speak on behalf of the Department of the Government. I can say
So if
that-
you're not going to save us, Facebook will.
Yes, no, but the government definitely understands the threat of cybersecurity and understands that it is an existential threat for us.
Right.
And I think that all departments within the government are trying their best to ensure that we protect the nation. And I don't think I don't think that the government is not acknowledging that problem. I mean, I work with folks on a daily basis who are acknowledging it and working on it
Parisa, quick thoughts
I
on
was talking about
creating
Russia.
conditions that can create catastrophes?
I don't, that's why I just, in terms of, at Facebook too, we have a security team that has the same level of sort of expertise and thoughtfulness and is really, is amazing, and not only keeping our platform safe, our service, our community safe as well. And
I would say that there was a super secret, super classified, until yesterday, breach of American nuclear power plants. There were at least 3, possibly 4 that were breached. There may be more to this story. It's beginning to come in. It's very close to your condition. So when you have nuclear power plants that have been breached by a foreign state actor in one of the most egregious and serious things, it does get you much closer. That's different than the questions of social media platforms, but this notion of cyber hacking and creating certain illusions of reality, or illusions essentially of not reality, but of trying to create conditions for decisions and bad decisions, flows very closely to what's also going on in sort of the digital cyber crime and maliciousness that is out there. And so what you said is a very real thing. If I would you, I'd move 15 seconds towards disaster in your clock. So
Thank you, Steve,
on
for
that
that
optimistic
whole
note,
thing.
yeah,
Wonderful.
please give a round of applause to Wajahat Ali, Harris Tarin, and Parisa Zagat. What a wonderful conversation. Thank you all. Thank you guys.